one out of 3 informative meetings that we will be having so that we can continue to inform our community members and your constituents. I'm going to have Representative Gordon open the floor, and go ahead with the opening remarks.
Thank you, Shayna, and welcome all, and thank you everybody for being here and tuning in with us. I'm J. Craig Gordon. I represent House District 163, which is Savannah, and on behalf of Georgia's Legislative Black Caucus, which is the largest Black caucus in the United States with over 70 members, we say thank you. We say thank you for taking time out of a busy day. On behalf of our chair, Karen Bennett, who's also on the call, my COVID-19 subcommittee chair, Senator Ed Harbinson, and again, all of the 70+ members of the GLBC. We say thank you. For over 45 years, the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus has stood to protect and fight for the welfare for others, people of color, the disenfranchised, and those without means. And we know that that fight continues by us standing on the shoulders of others who laid those bricks before us. Before there was a Representative Clark Cannon, who's on our panel this evening, there was a Representative Grace Hamilton, who was the first African-American female elected to the General Assembly. Before there was a Senator Nikema Williams, there was a Senator Diana Harvey Johnson. Before there was a J. Craig Gordon, there was a Bobby Hill and a Roy Allen. And before there was a chair, Karen Bennett, there was a chair, Georgiana Singfield, a chair, Kavin Smyrie, who's the Dean of the House of Representatives, and a chair, Billy Randall, amongst countless others. So we acknowledge them for their sacrifice. We acknowledge them for paving the way for where we are. To the people of Georgia, the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus is here to try to keep you informed as much as possible, anything related to COVID-19, along with all of the other issues that we've been fighting for the past 45+ years. So I say thank you, and I thank our panel who've all graciously decided to give us some time out of their busy day. Some have done more than one panel today and are still energized and full of a spirit of disseminating information that we know is good for our community. So welcome. Thank you all. I want to thank our moderator, if she can see me, and all of the tireless work that went into putting this together. And look forward to a powerful engagement.
Thank you so much, Representative Gordon. All right, and so now I'm going to start with our first remarks. We'll have our first remarks, some legislative updates from Congressman Hank Johnson.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. And Shayna, we miss you in Washington, D.C.
Oh, thank you.
You interned in our office. You did a great job. You left an indelible impression on everybody. And we're so happy to see you land in a good spot, still carrying on the work of the people. And by the way, everybody, Shayna is graduating from Georgia State tomorrow with her degree in political science. So she's definitely on her way. Yeah, so
thank you so much. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so thank you all for all that you do as leaders, everybody else on the call. And my shout out to the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus. You all are on the front lines helping us through this pandemic, and I'm honored to join you this evening on such an important call. Brothers and sisters, we are living in unprecedented times. For everyone alive today, nobody has been through anything like this global pandemic or anything with the proportions that we are experiencing today. It has devastated lives and communities across the country. And while these times are unprecedented, some things remain the same. That old adage that when white folks catch a cold, black folks catch pneumonia, it remains true. But the adage hits home more deeply when we recognize the fact that when white folks catch pneumonia, black folks catch COVID. And that adage applies not just to health outcomes, but also to economic well-being. All of the inequities and disparities that existed before COVID-19 are now magnified by this pandemic in ways before that society has never recognized. And as of today, there are 29,623 COVID-19 cases identified in Georgia, with more than 1,279 deaths. A new CDC study revealed that 80% of those hospitalized COVID-19 patients in Georgia were African Americans. And this study backs up others that show that Black Americans are more likely to be infected by this disease than any other demographic. But it's difficult to get a complete picture because Georgia stopped reporting COVID-19 deaths by race last week. The last report that I saw documented that 54% of Georgia deaths from COVID-19 were African Americans. And we're only 32% of the population. And by the way, 10% of the numbers don't record the race. So it could be higher than 54%, but we are only 32% of the population, and we are a majority of the deaths. And this fact weighs heavily on my conscience as Georgia has seen fit to open businesses back up, starting with barbershops and beauty parlors, which are staples in the Black community. And doing that the first weekend after the checks hit, the $1,200 checks, you know, why didn't they reopen the gun shops and the gun shows? But at any rate, reopening for business here in Georgia appears to be causing what looks to be the beginning of another spike in cases in our state. And it's troubling to me that with data collection having been curtailed, our Georgia elected officials are unwilling to assess with precision the people most at risk and where testing and treatment should be concentrated. How can you address the spread of COVID-19 without addressing racial equity issues, which, if allowed to persist, will certainly lead to increased infections and deaths throughout Georgia? To paraphrase Dr. King, a COVID-19 infection anywhere is a threat to everyone else everywhere. But our governor doesn't seem to be acting on that truth. On that somber note, I'm here to outline what Congress has done and what we're continuing to work towards to bring more relief to our communities. House Democrats took the first step in early March, passing a bipartisan emergency response funding package of $8.3 billion of entirely new money, focused critically on testing. Testing is fundamental to controlling the spread of COVID-19, and 2 weeks ago, Congress passed a CBC priority in a supplemental spending bill that appropriated $25 billion more for testing. Money was allocated so that mobile testing could be done, going to hotspots in our communities rather than asking people to travel long distances to get tested. We moved quickly to follow up the first bill we passed by passing the Families First Coronavirus Response Act to ensure free coronavirus testing for everyone who needs it, including the uninsured. And it also provides 2 weeks of paid sick leave, up to 3 months of family leave and medical leave for some eligible workers, and enhanced unemployment insurance. This bill also prioritized funding for nutrition initiatives, including SNAP, student meals, senior meals, and food banks. Then we passed the $2.2 trillion CARES package, the CARES Act, on March 27th, which provided $1.3 billion to community health centers, which are where many Black people without health insurance receive the medical care that they need but can't afford. The CARES Act also expanded unemployment benefits to include the self-employed and to independent contractors, many of whom are Black. And it provided for immediate direct cash payments to many Americans, including Black people, and more than $375 billion in small business relief, $200 billion for hospitals, $25 billion for transit agencies, $2 billion for HUD emergency solution grants, and hundreds of millions of additional dollars for additional support to state and local governments, including law enforcement agencies. And in Georgia, Georgia received $25 million for that purpose. Also $400 million for election assistance grants to states to help prepare for the 2020 elections was included in the CARES Act, and Georgia received $10 million for that purpose. And then we also, in that supplemental funding bill that we passed in April, we strengthened the Paycheck Protection Program with an additional $310 billion, including $30 billion for small banks, credit unions, and minority lending institutions, and an additional $30 billion for medium-sized banks and credit unions, with the goal that much of that $60 billion would be accessed by minority-owned businesses after many of those businesses struggled to get funding under the first round of PPP. And just a quick note, our schools have received emergency funds from Congress. More money is going to be coming, but Georgia has received a allocation with $33 million for Decatur, $32 million for Gwinnett, $22 million for Atlanta public schools, and for also Fulton County schools, $18 million. So as we move forward to CARES 2, which I expect to pass sometimes within the next 2 weeks or so, maybe sooner, we must provide strong support for essential workers so that many of those workers who are African Americans can get the paid and protected personal protective equipment they need in order to go to work and work these essential jobs. We also must increase SNAP funding and pension support and add more unemployment insurance and direct payments for those who are struggling. Also, an aid package for state and local governments must be included in the next spending package. And I will also say that the CARES Act provided for credit reporting requirements. In other words, for creditors to not be reporting slow payers or non-payers to credit agencies, hurting their ability to get credit in the future. And also, there were some rent abatement measures included in the CARES Act for lessors who have federally insured mortgages, and also mortgage relief for homeowners so that no foreclosures for at least 60 days, and also an avenue to for homeowners to get forbearance on paying their mortgages. So some of the things that we have as priority, and I won't go through the CBC priorities because I've taken enough time now, but we're fighting in the Congressional Black Caucus for a long-term comprehensive strategy to address underlying health issues and disparities, and full funding for the Office of Minority Health, a mission that I spearhead every year during the federal appropriations process. So with that, please know that my door is open to you. If you need to call me, just holler. Thank you, everybody. And I'll kick it back to the moderator.
Thank you so much, Congressman Johnson. We appreciate all of the information that you're providing to us and the hard work that you do. So now we are going to have Dr. Kamara Jones. We want you to come on and give us some updates with COVID-19 health and
Hi, thank you. So I am Dr. Kamara Jones. I am a family physician and an epidemiologist, and my work is on naming, measuring, and addressing the impacts of racism on the health and well-being of the nation. So you know I could go long and hard on racism right now. Not that COVID-19 is the first disease that manifests the big structural inequities in our society, because we see that when we see twice as many of our Black babies dying before their first birthday as white babies, or 3 times as many of our Black mothers dying during childbirth or within that year compared to white mothers, and the increase in obesity and diabetes and the increase in heart disease and all of that. So that is all, racism is the root cause of all of that. I will say with COVID-19, the way that racism is operating let me just back up and say, maybe you all didn't call it racism yet, but let me just say this. Starting in November and December of 2019, there was not a single human being on this planet who was immune to this virus. And one would expect that if opportunity were equally distributed in this country and if exposure to risk were evenly distributed in this country, there would be no way that we could slice and dice the population and find any differences between any groups. So the fact that we see such profound differences in the numbers of Black folks infected and then the numbers of Black folks dying compared to our representation in the population shows that there is something very profoundly off in terms of how opportunity is distributed and how exposure to risk is distributed by race in this country. And we have a name for that system of structuring opportunity and assigning value based on so-called race. That is racism. So, but I'm not going to go deep on racism right now because, except to say that we cannot let the nation, which right now is like, oh, something's happening here with COVID-19. And that's because the Black bodies are piling up so fast that their excess can't be ignored or normalized. That happened with Hurricane Katrina, and then we forgot. And the poisoning in the Flint water supply, and then we forgot. We cannot let this nation fall back into the slumber of racism denial after the COVID pandemic is over. So that's the one thing I want to say. But as an epidemiologist, I want to spend these just last 2 minutes that I have here to say that not only is it premature for Georgia to be reopening now, it is dangerous for Georgia to be reopening now. Not only is it that we don't have enough testing, in this whole country, we aren't even doing the right kind of testing strategy. So I'm hoping that all of our legislators can hear me now when I say that the way that we are testing, where in order to even get a test in most cases, you have to have a symptom on CDC's list of symptoms. First, it started out with fever, cough, or shortness of breath, and then they've added 6 more. But you have to go to a doctor, you have to convince that doctor, this is how it has been, to allow you to have a test. So many of us have called, not been getting the test, gone to the emergency room, sent back home to die, all of that. But even that approach is wrong because what we're doing is we're using the test among only symptomatic people to confirm a diagnosis, one person by one person, which means we can document the pandemic, and we're missing so many people who are dying at home or dying without ever being tested. So even the deaths are wrong, but we're documenting the course of the pandemic because we have this very narrow medical approach to testing. What we need is a public health surveillance, population-based approach to testing, where certainly we need to test everybody who's symptomatic and everybody who's even curious. We need to have enough tests to do that. And we have to go into the prisons and test everybody there. We have to go into the nursing homes and the meatpacking plants and the warehouses. We need to do that. But we also need to test in our communities. We can't test everybody like every week, but we can test a sample of people every week. Why? That includes symptomatic as well as those who do not have symptoms, the so-called asymptomatic. Why is this important? It is important because we need to know today how much infection there is in our community. If we go by the hospitalization rate to get a sense of how much infection there is in the community, that is a 2-week-old story. By the time people get to be hospitalized, those are the people who were infected 2 weeks ago. If you're using death rates to talk about how bad the infection is, that's a 3 to 4-week-old story. And with an infection that is exponentially spreading, 1 becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8, becomes 16, and on and on and on. We cannot have this delayed idea about how much infection there is in our community. So we need to have a on-the-ground estimate this week. How much infection is there? What will that do for us? Well, it will tell us where we need to put our health resources in 2 weeks' time in terms of hospitals and ventilators and medical staff. It will allow us to identify those people without symptoms who turn out to test positive and have them isolate themselves. And then we do contact tracing for everybody, the symptomatic and the asymptomatic people. Who were you around? And we ask them to isolate themselves. By taking people out of the circulation, we can change the course of the epidemic. We can squash it out in a way that we can't do if we're just waiting for people to be sick. That is because between 1/4 and maybe 2/3 of people who get infected with this virus do not show symptoms, but they can still spread the virus, even though they don't show symptoms. So I'm going to close out here to say that I am strongly encouraging our legislators to go beyond just testing those who have symptoms, which we haven't been testing everybody. We need to test everybody who has symptoms. And if we know there are hot spots in closed communities or in prisons or nursing homes, like we need to test everybody in there, workers, people who are in there. And we also need to do a public health surveillance, population-based probability sample of our cities and counties and the like, so that we can know what is the course of the infection today, how much is it today, so that we don't have to just document the numbers of hospitalized and dead. We can change the course of the pandemic. So thank you. Happy to answer any questions about that.
Thank you, Dr. Jones, for that update. And yes, we will get to the questions shortly, and we will open the floor shortly. Please be reminded, we want to ensure that we're able to have enough questions being asked from the community. Just we want to keep that in mind going forward. Thank you. And so now we're going to pass it to Representative Park Cannon. I'm going to have you unmuted and spotlighted. Okay, are you there?
Yes,
Great.
good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. I wanted to start by agreeing with Dr. Jones that right now, what we are talking about is that the reports are showing that African Americans and Black Georgians account for more than 50% of Georgians' COVID-19 deaths, despite only making up 30% of our state's 10 million people. The reason why we are in a stance of making sure that everyone is staying at home and social distancing is not because we don't want businesses to open and for our state to have revenue estimates that they can determine other things based off of. What we simply want is to live and to feel safe in our communities. So I wanted to talk to you today as a doula, which is an emotional support person for someone who is in labor, which I am, and about the experience of many pregnant people in Georgia right now, especially those who are headed towards delivery. Of course, we know that Georgia already had an alarming maternal mortality or maternal death rate and put us in last place for keeping mothers safe. So we as a state moved to put money in the budget for this issue. And now when we go back to session, we want to continue to fight to keep that money in the budget to address some of the existing concerns related to maternal mortality, but also some of the newer ones you could imagine is we have virtual support. You might not be allowed into the hospital with the person you're supporting. And so this idea of being able to actually have autonomy over your body is seemingly being wiped away again from our communities, as we have already been crying out about this issue. So I am excited to announce that Georgia has taken one step forward to add to their maternal mortality review committee, to add to the criteria that can actually identify and capture bias, which we believe will help us get to some of the initiatives that will actually meet the need of Black mothers and mothers who are people of color in Georgia. As we know, mutual aid societies are popping up right now in our communities. If you know someone who is pregnant, who is about to deliver, who has already delivered, has under a 1-year-old and needs that support, the perinatal support village is open right now. It will be information up on our page. We want to thank everyone for the kind of quirky and also cultural ways that we are getting through this. Our spirits are still lifted. We do still have hope as people of color, as Black people. I see you, I see us. We are having Netflix watch parties on our porches with our neighbors instead of going. We're putting tea lights in our driveways for our health workers. We're lighting up our streets. We're doing all of those things. And we're doing it because we know that there are people, even more so than Black people, who are affected in this time, people who have been incarcerated, people who are undocumented, people who just simply need help with mental health services. So excited to be here. Thank you everyone for joining in and for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Representative Cannon, and thank you for those awesome ideas. This is going great. Everyone hold tight. We'll be opening for questions soon, and we're going to continue with our remarks from Senator Nikema Williams.
Hi, everyone. Hi, I am State Senator Nikema Williams, and I'm happy to be here with you, having recovered from COVID-19. So I am happy to have everyone on this call to get all of the information you can so that you don't have to experience what I went through in my 3-week battle recovering from this virus. I also have the privilege of serving as the chairwoman of the Democratic Party of Georgia and had some long negotiations with our current Secretary of State to get everything in place and making it a little easier for us to cast our votes when we go out to vote in the primary on June 9th. It has been, we know that staying home is the best way to stay safe, but you can't vote from home unless you receive absentee ballots. Fortunately, we've had absentee ballots mailed to 6.9 million active voters in the state of Georgia. That challenge is that a lot of voters don't typically vote in primaries. And so they've been getting these absentee ballot applications in the mail and didn't really know what they were, didn't think that it was real mail. So if you talk to someone, if you hear from someone who got this absentee ballot application in the mail or maybe threw it away, they can still download the absentee ballot application online from their local Board of Elections website or from the Secretary of State's website and submit that to vote from home. In addition to that, that changed our voter registration deadlines. When the primary was pushed back to June 9th, you now have until May 11th to register to vote for the June 9th primary. Early voting, which is mandated in state law, will start on May 18th. So you will have an opportunity to vote in person for the June 9th election. And when you show up to vote in person, social distancing measures will be in place. And also, there will be drop boxes in counties where you can securely drop your absentee ballots if you just want to drop them off and go. The main thing to keep in mind is that we have been, as a Black caucus, as legislators, working around the clock to make sure that everyone's constitutional right to vote, even in a primary election, is upheld and protected while being safe, because we are so heavily impacted by this virus. My zip code 30331 has had the highest rates in the state. So this is, when I say this is really personal for me, having fought the virus, being here at the helm of the party and as a legislator fighting day in and day out with your Black caucus leaders across the state, we are taking this serious, and we want you to make sure that you have all of the resources and tools you need. If you have people in your community that have questions about how to return their absentee ballot, about what to do if you already voted for the March 24th presidential primary, you can have them dial the voter protection number at 1-888-730-5816. That's 1-888-730-5816. And someone will help them with their specific case and talk them through the process, because we want everyone to safely cast their right to vote. And we know that that means voting from home in great numbers. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them at the end of this, but stay home, stay safe, y'all. I don't want you to deal with what I had to go through and what so many of our neighbors or friends are dealing with fighting this virus right now.
Okay, okay, hello, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Great. All right, we're going to continue now with thank you, first of all, Senator Williams, for that update. We're going to continue with Ms. Kimberly Ballard Washington, the Savannah State University interim president, to give us an update on education and COVID-19. So first, let me locate her. Kimberly, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, and I'm out of the 64 participants, I'm trying to locate your face. Okay, I found you. She has to wave. All right, we're gonna spotlight your video and please give us that fabulous update.
Okay, so I'm Kimberly Ballard Washington. I'm serving as the interim president at Savannah State University. And of course, just like every other entity, person in the world, we have been affected by COVID-19.
Yes.
Our students moved off campus on March 13th. We thought we were moving them on temporary basis, but in very short order, realized that we were going to have to go to online courses for the rest of the semester. Regular classes ended this past Friday. Our students are in the course of taking their finals right now, and we are trying to make it as as interactive environment as possible with our students to keep them engaged in the university. And so we are hopeful to be able to return to full on-campus activities for the fall semester. Of course, our planning is underway. All universities in the university system planning to return to campus for fall semester. All of us will be submitting plans to the university system so that we can figure out how to do that. Because of course, we're going to have to do it while social distancing. 18, 19, 20-year-olds don't social distance well. So we're going to have to come up with some fail-proof plans, how to do it in the residence halls, how to do it in the classrooms. At Savannah State, we have very few large classrooms, which is really what it'll take to be able to conduct business as usual. If you have a classroom that normally fits 100 students and you have 30 students, then you can move them into that larger classroom. We have some classrooms that fit 100, but very few. So we're trying to figure out how we're gonna be able to return our students to campus and do it in a very responsible manner to protect our students, but also to protect our faculty and staff, many of whom are dealing with personal health issues or maybe in that group that is more likely than others to acquire the disease. And also some are over the age of 65. So we're trying to work through all of those issues, and but always and also trying to keep our students engaged so that they can complete their degrees and move to being successful adults.
All right, thank you so much for that update. And we will now move along to Mr. Robert E. James from the Carver State Bank. All right, I'm gonna unmute you now. And okay.
All right, good evening. Thank you so much for having me. I want to thank Representative Craig Gordon for inviting me to be on the call, as well as just greet Congressman Johnson, the rest of the elected officials that are present, and all of my fellow panelists. Carver State Bank is one of 20 remaining African-American owned banks in the United States. And just to give you an idea of what that means, there are over 5,000 federally chartered banks in the United States, and there's only about 20 left that are African-American owned. Fortunately, in Georgia, we have 3 of them. 2 are in Atlanta, and Carver is headquartered in Savannah, Georgia. We've been serving the community in Savannah since 1927. Our founder was a man by the name of Louis B. Toomer, and our current CEO is also Robert James. He's my father. Access to capital was already a major problem in the African American community prior to COVID-19. And as Congressman Johnson said in his remarks, COVID-19 is really a magnifying glass on all of the issues that really cause harm in the African American community. And it really has shown a lot of the disparities that we suffer. And so from an economic standpoint, we suffer from a major wealth gap. We're more entrepreneurial as African Americans. We have a higher percentage of entrepreneurs in our community, but we have much, much less access to wealth, and our small businesses are smaller and have less sophistication. And so when Congress passed the CARES Act, the first round of stimulus, they included what was called the Paycheck Protection Program, which is designed to give small businesses an opportunity to get 100% guaranteed loans through the Small Business Administration that is administered by the banks, and then with the opportunity to have those loans forgiven if they spend the proceeds of the loan within 8 weeks on eligible costs, primarily keeping your people employed, keeping your payroll. What we saw in the very first round, there was $350 billion made available through the Paycheck Protection program in the first round. And what we saw was a real feeding frenzy. You probably saw articles in the press about pretty large companies, large restaurant chains across the country, large hotel chains taking advantage of this money, and folks with truly small businesses not being able to access it. What we found is that, in particular in the Black community, a lot of African Americans who own businesses that bank at larger institutions, those larger institutions were turning them away. Were not accepting their applications because they were prioritizing the applications of the larger, wealthier businesses. Again, shining a magnifying glass on some of those issues that we face as a community. At Carver, we're a very small institution. Our asset size is only $40 million, and that sounds like a lot of money, but in banking, we're one of the smallest of the small. There's only, I think, less than 25 banks in the country that are as small as we are, but that are also located in a metropolitan area. We decided to jump into the Paycheck Protection Program with both feet because we knew the need was so great. And so, we're proud to report that as of today, we're at nearly $10 million in terms of PPP loans that we've made, and that over 90% of our PPP loans have been made to African American owned businesses. When you contrast that nationally, less than 10% of PPP loans have been made to Black owned businesses. And prior to the COVID-19 epidemic, the Small Business Administration, which is administering the PPP program, there were only 2.9% of all SBA loans nationwide were made to African American owned businesses. And so we still have a lot of work to do in our community, particularly to make sure that the word gets out to African American business owners that yes, you do qualify for these funds. You qualify for it if you have a business that was in business on February 15th of 2020, you qualify to apply. It's really critical that our businesses take advantage of the capital. You can come directly to Carver State Bank. We've also partnered on a national level with Combs Enterprises. Sean Diddy Combs really stepped up to create a national platform to try to help African Americans and other people of color access these funds. And so we partnered with his platform. It's called ourfairshare.com. So you can go to carverstatebank.com and you can go to ourfairshare.com and you can try to apply for the PPP program through either of those platforms. And so again, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Look forward to your questions and look forward to the engagement.
Thank you so much, Mr. James. All right, and now we are going to go to Mr. Terrell Whitley from Liquid Soul to give us an update on the entertainment industry during COVID-19.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for having me, as well as thank Representative Craig Gordon for the invitation. The entertainment industry here in Georgia has been devastated by COVID-19, and there has continuously been a ripple effect. Many people, some people know, some people do not, but many in the entertainment in this particular city and this state has a growing and budding industry in film and television. But most of those workers are contractors. They're independent contractors that come together to form an entity to deliver a product, that being a television show or a movie or et cetera, et cetera. Well, as independent contractors, many of those people found themselves quickly out of work. And unfortunately, they can't move from market to market, i.e. go from here to New Orleans or to Los Angeles or New York, because all of those locations, productions have been shut down as well. In addition, the movie theaters have been shut down across the country, really across the world, and they're just starting to begin that process of figuring out how to reopen. Recently in Australia, they did start a production of a show. It's the first production in the world, quite frankly, to start officially based on COVID-19 and pandemic social distancing practices. Not exactly sure how that show is going to pan out. That many of you may know Tom Hanks reported being positive, and he was part of that particular show that is now being rebooted in Australia. So that impact and what that means for the African American community, I think, is significant. There are a number of entertainers, not just in film, but in sport and music, that have not been able to produce their art. But the great thing is that many of them are leveraging their voice, and they are being very active in speaking to their audiences and leveraging their influence to help people understand the seriousness of COVID-19 and how to shelter in place. And even in situations like we have in Georgia, where our governor has said one thing, we're telling people to make smart decisions, to be conscious of not just themselves, but conscious of others and around them. I'm pleased and very glad to report, and I'm sure that our next presenter will give you much more detail, that I've partnered with, and this is a public-private partnership to really help drive testing in our communities. We actually executed a testing site yesterday at the House of Hope here in Decatur with Pastor E. Dewey Smith Jr. He, of course, is going to give an update from the clergy perspective, but it was, I think, to both he and I surprise, but also our delight, that there were hundreds and hundreds of cars, which I believe equated to thousands of people, because these hundreds of cars, each car had 2 to 4, sometimes 5 or 6 individuals that were coming out to be tested. And this was in our community. And what it proved is that there's an urgency for people to be tested for COVID-19. They want to know their status, but we have to be vigilant and promoting and making sure that they get tested, but also applying pressure where necessary for testing to take place. Testing is critical because it allows us to now begin to look at not only COVID-19, but what we also have to talk about are these other health disparities within the African American community, which COVID-19, I believe, has shined a very bright light and exposed in a magnificent way. That there are some real serious issues in our communities with obesity, with high blood pressure, with respiratory issues. I myself am a cancer survivor, so I'm very familiar, and I also deal with high blood pressure. So I'm very familiar with how these systemic and how these particular issues kind of lean into our communities. And COVID-19 is not just a singular issue, but combined with these other health disparities, I think it presents a very significant scenario for our African American communities. I believe someone may ask the question, well, where are these hotspots? Well, specifically for African Americans, what we're seeing is it's becoming very rampant across our community, but it's going unchecked. And when it does get checked, it's too late. I've had in my company, out of my DC office, I have 4 offices around the country. I shut them down, but in my DC office, one of our associates lost his wife. And it was a very rapid scenario. She was in the hospital at the top of the week. By the end of the week, she was gone. Recently here, I'm on the board of the Celebration Bowl, ESPN Celebration Bowl with John Grant. We just lost one of our board members who was on a respirator for 32 days.
Wow.
And he was in the hospital for 35 days. And he lost his battle with COVID-19. So for me, this is very real, it's very personal. I'm reaching out to other entertainers, other people that have voice, but also have reach and have influence to really compel them to reach out and help. Today, I mentioned earlier that Dr. Jones was on a presentation and Jennifer Hudson came on and lent her voice to the conversation of COVID-19 and African Americans. So know that this particular industry, which does have a great financial through line within our community in this state, it will come back. It will take time for it to come back. We have great stakeholders here, but during this period, I think it even more important that we be aligned and that we figure out ways, knowing that politics and that things can happen that can really deter us, but be really focused on how we collectively drive home the necessity for better testing, for a much tighter economic situation, which can level the playing field to allow people to actually shelter at home, because some people are unable, and many of those people are blue collar workers that are considered essential workers. And I want you to notice how those two have become very much so aligned. And a lot of those people are Black and brown people that are essential now. Yes. And it's interesting how they've been essential in building America for over 400 years. And now they are caught up in the whirlwind of what COVID-19 is delivering. So again, thank you all for having me. It's a pleasure to give you this update. And I look forward to your questions and additional conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Whitley. And before we go to our last speaker, everybody take a breath. I know it's a lot. Self-care is important. I see Representative Cannon. I don't know if you all can see her, but she's teaching us how to breathe. Sometimes we have to really breathe on these calls. We just go and go and go. But I just wanted to acknowledge how this is one of the most diverse panels that I've ever moderated during this whole quarantine. So thank you, Georgia Legislative Black Caucus, for giving us information and resources from every angle. And now, without further ado, we will bring on Dr. E. Dewey Smith for our clergy update, and then we will open the floor for questions. Yes, we will open the floor for questions soon. So let me unmute you.
Thank you very much, and let me thank the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus for the opportunity. Representative Gordon, thank you for the invitation. I want to say a couple of things from the outset that we in the clergy community, we did have some difficulty initially in terms of having an agenda and approach in terms of COVID-19. Unfortunately for many of my colleagues, we were trying to distinguish between the reality of what's faith and what's fear, and using faith as an excuse or the context for which we should continue worship services. I think we've been able to navigate through that. Unfortunately, we've lost a lot of people and a lot of clergy around the country. Within the Church of God in Christ, we've had 18 Church of God in Christ bishops to pass away. In Atlanta, we've lost 3 or 4 pastors to COVID-19. Albany, Georgia was a hot spot as well. So some of the initial cases of COVID-19 were actually diagnosed. It was found that those things, the contamination actually started in church. Floyd County, Dublin, Georgia, Albany, Georgia, and most of them at funerals and at church services. So I think now there is a greater grasp where we cannot allow the American sense of capitalism, of putting profits over the lives of people, has come to the forefront. And there are some spaces and some places where pastors are still determined to have worship services anyhow. But I think for the most part, the majority now do realize this is a serious thing. It's a global pandemic. Unfortunately, there's a lot of mixed messaging from our leadership across the state and subsequently across the nation. For instance, the governor of Indiana said on yesterday that churches will have a relaxed policies now because churches will now be the test groups and the control groups. And we will watch them for 14 to 21 days to see what happens within those churches. And after 14 to 21 days, it will give us some context as to how we can approach COVID going on in the future. Also, the governor of Texas was caught on tape admitting that as a result of relaxing the guidelines, that it would worsen the pandemic. Unfortunately, here in Georgia, we've had mixed messaging coming from our state as well. And it went from no mask gatherings to 250 to 50 to 10. And that's never really been one agenda or one policy that was set with some type of dispatch. So, but I think we're doing a better job. We've been more creative in that regard. Now, to the extent that on yesterday, we had approximately about 1,800 cars that came to our campus yesterday from 3 to 7 in a private-public partnership. I think over 700 people were tested yesterday in DeKalb County. DeKalb County is the second most infected county in Georgia. And as of yesterday, that was the first time that any testing had been done, private or public, in the entire county. It's fortunate, but also it's unfortunate. While we've been on the call today, I've been working with our office frantically. We'll do more testing this coming Friday back at the church again, so we're planning that. Also had a conversation with Shaquille O'Neal's team on yesterday, and we're planning to do another testing in DeKalb County and perhaps Fulton County within the next 10 days. And so from a faith perspective, we need prayer. We're supposed to be leading the way, but sometimes we've allowed our dependence upon faith and not having a solid theology that recognizes that we as shepherds must take care of the people to prevent danger and not lead them to danger. And so hopefully we realize now that with the state reopening, it's going to make things worse for our people, but we have to do to have these types of conversations to equip and empower our people. It's been unfortunate that since things have reopened here in Georgia, that we're in malls buying Air Jordan tennis shoes, West End Mall this past Sunday, car shows and racing up and down the roads. And so I think people think this is a game. And as someone said earlier, Malcolm X says, when America catches a cold, the Black community catches pneumonia. So we have to do a lot more work in that regard. And we're open to suggestions. What we can do to assist this forum in the future, please keep us aware of it. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Smith. Okay, and now we are going to open the floor for questions. For the sake of time, we are trying to go to about, Representative Gordon, how long would you like to go for questions? About till 8:15?
Yeah, I think to be respectful of everybody's time. I know some folk have been working all day, have been on town hall, so.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so if you would like to ask a question, here are a couple of guidelines. If you are calling from your phone and you are a phone caller, there should be an option on your dial pad, *9. Press *9 to raise your hand, and I'll be able to recognize that you have a question or a brief question. We definitely want to keep it brief. So you have a brief question, and I'll be able to recognize it. Additionally, I see that there are some individuals that have already been using the group chat box here on Zoom. So feel free to utilize that as well. And please be gracious towards the moderator as I am reading all of your questions and recognizing who's raising their hand. Additionally, if you are a video caller, if you look at the bottom part of your screen, you roll over with your mouse, it should give you an option to chat, and then you should see where you'll be able to raise your hand. 3 dots, the little 3 dots will tell you where you can raise your hand. Okay, so we'll get started with questions now. I see one that we have already in the group chat. So it says, how do we begin to emphasize to the young people the severity of the pandemic? And I'm going to have all the speakers unmuted. Feel free to chime in.
It's
Well,
not just the youngest people who, all of us need to understand this is a real deal thing. And it doesn't help with the president. It doesn't help with the governor uh, playing this off. But we're losing people. So I just think that we're acting as if the virus has done all of its damage. The only job of the virus is to continue to reproduce itself. So many people have not yet been infected. The moment we lift up our stay-at-home orders and the moment we stop wearing our masks, stop washing our hands, touching our face, we're going to have, it's just going to be, it might come back worse than before. I don't know how to get this message through the people. I guess the way I'm thinking about it is, imagine that there was a sniper outside of your house, right? And like we're under siege. And if there's a sniper outside of your house, that sniper is not going to kill everybody. But if you walk outside your house, you're at a much higher risk of getting killed than if you're able to stay in place or if you're able to protect yourself with protective equipment like a bulletproof vest or something. So we need to understand this is a real death threat. This is no game. And probably in this country, only maybe 10% have even met the virus yet. The other 90%, the virus is just waiting because its only job is to reproduce itself.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jones. Right now, I'm going to actually, this is one of a student, a millennial from Georgia State University. I'm going to lower your hand, Josh. And Josh?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. I wanted to ask to the panel, some analysts have predicted that the economy won't return to its new normal until about 2022. What are the implications of this to the Black businesses, Black community, Black pockets, and is there anything that we can do to kind of limit this or adjust to this new normal economically?
Hold on, I think
I am.
Representative Johnson. Okay, Congressman Johnson, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'll yield to one of the business people that are that may want to get in first, and if no one wants to respond, I'll respond.
Yeah, I'll
Sure.
respond. This is
I'll-
Terrell Whitley, and I'm a 20-year small business owner here. I've owned my agency for 20 years in Atlanta. And as I connect with other business owners, our conversation is very specific. That we, specifically in the African-American community, we have to get back to really concentrating on spending our dollars with each other. As a Black business owner, I hire Black vendors. I've had to pivot tremendously. We're working with our banks, specifically Black-owned banks, and really trying to create a sense of community, making sure that we keep each other actively and gainfully employed. I will tell you this, Josh, it will become more and more difficult because the marketplace and specifically the unemployment rate is tracking so far, so fast, so high. And now in our communities, we're going to have to find pockets and industries where we can begin to dial in and begin to focus our efforts. And you seem like a young man. I highly recommend to our young people right now to look at industries that allow for you to leverage your expertise in communications and social media and in areas of new technology that allow you to work remotely, that allow you to leverage your knowledge and connect many of us. And even like my parents or Gen Xers like myself, boomers that may not be as savvy in those areas, find ways and unique ways and innovative ways to help us deal with not being able to do certain things as actively as we once may have been able to do. I think our young people have a great opportunity there, but we have to encourage them and then support them. Furthermore, we have to give them and support them in business, give them the capital, support them in business to be successful.
All right, Mr. James, you can go ahead and
chime. I thought that was a great response. And I think, again, the more that we can support one another, the more that we'll be able to weather these kinds of storms. And on the flip side of that, though, I think it's really important for all of our existing institutions, the ones that remain. And this is not just banking institutions, but it's also our institutions of higher learning, our medical institutions, our churches. We all have to change with the times. We can't continue to look backwards. We've got to look forward. And that means that we really do need to engage the new generation so that we can embrace technology, so we can make sure that we can be there and be relevant to your generation. One of the things that I know that we need to do better at Carver is reach out and be more relevant to the younger generation, embrace technology. So one of the silver linings of this COVID-19 crisis is that it has really accelerated our embrace of technology, so that we found that, wait a minute, we can actually operate this bank without people coming into the lobby. We can actually operate remotely. We've put our mobile platform online after many years of discussing it. We're allowing folks to have more access to online capability, but we really are going to need more young people to help us to continue to stay relevant.
Okay. Congressman Johnson?
Yes. Yes. Okay. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Yes. Congress is going to do everything it can to stabilize the economy and to keep the economy moving. The American government has the ability to generate money, and we are the world's banker. It's in the world's best interest that America remain a solvent nation. And because we are a free country, people around the world know that when they make an investment in American treasuries, they're going to be able to get their money out with interest. And so that makes us the world's banker. So with that status, we can generate the money that we need in order to keep the economy moving forward. And so you'll find after we do this CARES 4 Act, then we will continue to contribute dollars to making sure that this economy keeps moving. There's some growth industries that are going to be there. Healthcare is going to be a place where you can start a business or get a job. Education is so important. Now that people have lost jobs, it's time for them to go back to work and get retraining. What do you get retraining in? Well, we're in the information age. And so learning how to code, doing the business that keeps the information age current and up to date. People need to go back to school, get those tools. So many different areas. So where there is a downfall, there's also an opportunity. So don't look at it like the economy is going to go into a depression and we will just dwell there for the next 10 or 15 years. We're going to do everything we can to prevent that from happening.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Congressman Johnson. Representative Roger Bruce has a question. I'm going to unmute you and lower your hand, and then I'll go to Kimberly's question. Once again, I see all of the comments in the group chat. Legislators and panelists, whilst the other panelists may be speaking, you may go ahead and answer some questions in the chat box as well, because it's a lot of them. And we want to make sure that we provide enough information. Some people may answer your question already, so I won't recognize a specific question if I've already heard it be answered already. So Representative Bruce, I'm going to, all right, you're unmuted.
Hi, everybody. This question is for Hank Johnson. Do you think that there's a conscious decision both in Washington and at the local level for this to continue as a method of voter suppression? If we scare enough people into thinking that if they go to the polls and vote that they're going to get sick or even potentially die, do you think this is a conscious decision?
Okay, well, I do want to thank you, Representative Bruce, for that question. I also want to give a big shout out to my family pastor, the Reverend E. Dewey Smith of the House of Hope, Greater Travelers Rest, who's on the call today. And thank you, sir, for having that drive-through testing at your church. We need the testing to be in the places where the infections are. We don't need them to be out at Cobb Performing Arts Center or the Gwinnett County, Performing Arts Center 30, 40 miles out. We need those facilities and those opportunities right here in the neighborhood. So thank you for bringing that to us. Your question, Representative Bruce, is one that some might say is just a ridiculous, paranoid question. But having lived as long as I have lived and having seen what I have seen, I cannot agree with that, with that analysis. Although I'm not able to say that folks are doing this specifically for the purpose of voter suppression, that they opened up Georgia early for purposes of voter suppression, but there is some reason why the barbershops and the beauty salons and the tattoo parlors were opened up, but yet other folks love to go to the gun show. They love to go to the gun range. They love to go to the gun store. Those stores were not opened up. They were not the first round to open up. The first round to open up, it seemed like almost it was targeted towards certain communities, Black folks. And then to listen on the call when someone mentioned what they heard in Indiana, it seems that there are some forces out there who want to use our communities as guinea pigs, and they want to use us as canaries in the coal mine, we can't allow them to do that to us. So in terms of reaching out to our young people who believe, some of whom believe that they cannot contract this virus because it's a virus that is only infecting older people or getting older people with compromised systems in trouble. No, this is going to young people who are able-bodied, and one day they are able-bodied and the next day they're fighting for their lives. And so we've got to get that word out to our young people. We may need to use the sources that they utilize for their information, like social media, and even going around talking to people. But you have to have the people who the young people will listen to being the ones that's talking to them. So we've got to actually create some jobs in public health to go out and help sell the message of safe practices to our young people. So I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you. Ms. Kimberly, and then Senator Nikema Williams. And then we're going to go ahead and close out soon.
So I have a question. I wanted to respond to Josh's question. Josh, I think one of the things that's really going to take is people like you, students who are engaged and thinking about what's going on in society, stepping up and speaking to others. A lot of our college students are upset about not being on campus this semester, having to leave quickly, not thinking about the risks that were associated with being in a very populated environment. Having people like you that obviously, because you're on this call, obviously I'm going to guess that you understand the risks that are associated with it, not just to you, but to your family members and others that you come in contact with. It's going to take people like you stepping up to communicate with other people like you. But along those same lines, you know, the implications of the new normal, one of the panelists said earlier that the essential employees who are still having to go to work every day or were having to go to work when the rest of us were working from home, they look like us. They're generally the lower paid employees. We need those individuals and people that are coming up now in high school and college age to get a degree, to become educated, so that you are prepared to work in a field that can change this world. And you won't be the ones that have to show up to do something with your hands. It's all well and good to work with your hands, but we want those minds to be working. And so we want to make sure that those individuals are going back to school and becoming more educated citizens.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And then Senator Nikema Williams, I will unmute you. And then after that, thank you so much, everybody. We're going to close the questions because I see a lot of people have been able to comment in the chat box to answer the questions that were there. And now I'm going to unmute you, Senator Williams. Can you hear Senator Williams? Are you there?
I can hear you.
Perfect.
I just wanted to reflect back on the voter suppression question that was brought up by Representative Bruce earlier. And while we can't say specifically what exactly is on anyone's mind as we go through this pandemic, what we do know is we heard the Republican Speaker of the House here in Georgia say that the more people that vote by mail, the more the worse off it would be for their party. And we also heard the President of the United States say these same things. So we need to utilize this option to vote by mail so that we can stay home, we can stay safe. I agree with Dr. Jones. We don't need to just focus on people who are of a certain age. Y'all, I'm not 65 years old. I'm nowhere close to it. And I contracted this virus and it was brutal. So we need to make sure that we are reaching out across ages and across demographics to make sure that we're looking out for each other. We're returning these absentee ballots because we know that the people on this call are fighting for us and are making sure that our right to vote is upheld. But there are a lot of people out there who don't want you to return these ballots, who don't want your voice to be heard, so that when it comes time for in November, that you're not in the habit of voting by mail. So please, if you have any questions or concerns around voting by mail or how to go through the process, or your absentee ballot was lost, dial the voter protection hotline at 1-888-730-5816 and get the assistance and share that number with everyone that you know.
Thank you, Senator Williams. All right, thank you everyone for your questions. And now I am going to have Representative Karen Bennett, who is the chairwoman of the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus. She's going to give us our closing remarks and then we have to go. Okay, let me unmute you. I'm sorry, hold on. Okay, perfect.
Thank you again. Thank you to our wonderful and marvelous host, Ms. Shana Fields, for doing such a great and fantastic job. I want to thank each of you for joining us on this call tonight, this video tonight, on behalf of the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus. It certainly has been a very diverse group, and you have given out valuable information, and we hope that we will continue to resonate this kind of information throughout our communities so that more and more people hear and can take advantage of this opportunity. While the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus is the largest Black caucus in the country, it's more important that we are the most impactful and that we are able to touch and change the lives of the people that we serve. So bringing information and action to our constituents is one way to have an impact. So we know that what we don't know can actually kill us. So I want to thank our co-chairs of the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus COVID-19 Task Force, Representative Craig Gordon and State Senator Ed Harbison, for leading this effort and leading the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus in our pursuit of equity and justice in our community. So we don't take this lightly. We don't take our responsibilities lightly. And we want to thank each and every one of you for supporting the Black Caucus and bringing your gifts and talents and giving up of your time so that we can amplify and resonate voices that will actually, information will actually save lives. So in the meantime, The Georgia Legislative Black Caucus is advocating and fighting for more testing to become available, not just for those who demonstrate signs and symptoms of the virus, because we know now that you can have carriers of this virus that exhibit no symptoms at all. So we want to continue to fight for universal testing. I want to thank the Reverend for making his church available to do testing in DeKalb County. And we're going to continue to fight and encourage other private entities to do the same and do likewise. We also are fighting for contact tracing, and that be made available on a scale just as largely as the testing is made available. And then we're fighting to reclassify our service workers so that they can be eligible to receive the PPEs that are also being made available by the state to our frontline workers, our service workers, and our essential workers. So we are working hard to reclassify some of they are essential services. The governor has opened up the state and sent people back to work, but yet there's no resources to follow that. So we continue to fight for state resources to be made available in the community. I want to thank our banks. I want to thank our banker for being so gracious and working with our minority community to make sure that PPEs are given out in communities of people of color. So once again, this is the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus. We are fighting and continue to advocate on behalf of those in need. We want the testing to become made available in the communities where the testing is needed. So I agree once again, and I want to thank each and every one of you. I want to thank Senator Nikema Williams for continuing to keep the fight for our voter protection and our voters' rights and to keep that voice. We want to continue to thank Fair Count for the census. We don't want to get distracted. And I want to thank Congressman Johnson for continuing to fight in Washington to make sure that these dollars trickle down to the state. And the next round, the round 4 of the CARES Act, will be directed. Some of those monies will be directly given to the state. So we'll continue to follow the money. We're putting pressure on the governor to make available the information so that we know where these resources are going and whom they are going to. And so we will continue to fight the good fight, fight the fight. And I want to thank each and every one of you for being supportive of the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus. And together we will continue to amplify our voices and in the community where it really makes an impact. So thank you again for joining us this evening. Back to you, Ms. Shana. Oh, I want to thank Ms. Andrea Wiggins in our office, who continues to work with Shana Fields, our moderator, and to each and every one of you personally. Just thank you again, and let's keep up the fight. Good evening.
Thank you so much, Representative Bennett. That was a phenomenal closing. And I would like to thank you all for participating. Platforms like these allow us to connect the community members to our legislators and elected officials and vice versa. Everyone have a safe and lovely evening. Good night. Once again, I'm Shana Fields. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.